They don't think this Democrat Party is going to pick a Jewish candidate by the time of the next election. They think that the current dynamics in the party would stop that from happening. Now, you might think Republican woes on Iran mean that it's all good news for the Democrats when it comes to their future. However, they're having a fight of their own. We've talked before in this podcast about the Democrat Socialists of America, partly in the news since Graham Platner's rise and fall. He dropped out last week. But this wing of the party is gaining momentum. And let's just refresh listeners' memories on what they stand for.
I am thrilled to be joined here by our first ever director of New York City's newly created Office of LGBTQI+ Affairs.
Democratic socialism means that we must reform a political system which is corrupt, that we must create an economy that works for all, not just the very wealthy.
We're fighting the fight that we have been fighting at the federal level.
Tax the rich right there, but it's really about having a real conversation about fairness and equity in our system. We're talking about providing working families with childcare, healthcare, meeting the climate crisis at the scale that it deserves.
Now, they've been doing well in some recent primaries, but more centrist Democrats are now taking a stand against them and warning that the party has to be careful about their next steps. They put together a letter called The Promise to America. We stand for capitalism, not socialism, safety, not lawlessness, fiscal discipline, patriotism, and free speech. So, Jerry, they currently only have 15 signatures, so I think we could argue it's not quite matching the momentum on the other side. Now, one of the things you hear is this is a contained movement when it comes to these democratic socialists, and it's mainly New York, but we are seeing them pop up in other places. And even with Platner, he may be out, but the fact he got as far as he did, and we don't know who his successor is yet. So are they a force that could actually change the nature or the shape of the Democrats when it comes to 2028 and perhaps more imminently if they take back the House?
We always have to be careful, especially those of us of a kind of conservative disposition, in overstating the extent to which the far left is advancing, right? I mean, it kind of, be cynical for a moment, it kind of suits us to say, oh my God, look, the Reds are coming, it's terrible, you better vote Republican or whatever. So I'm mindful of that. And we've also seen, as much as we've seen these Democratic Socialists of America doing well, we had Zoran Mamdani, who kind of, the mayor of New York, a big victory for them. We've had other victories for them in primary races in New Jersey and Colorado. As you say, we've got a lot of attention now on this main race now that Graham Platner, the Nazi tattoo man turned supposed sort of democratic socialist, as he's dropped out. But even so, they are still relatively limited in number. They're not by any means the majority of the Democratic Party. The party has not been overrun. But I do think even acknowledging that this is not as yet a kind of anything approaching a sort of a landslide for the Democratic Socialists over the left, I do think the signs you're seeing are pretty clear that this is kind of that not only that these are the people, as you say, Katy, with all the energy and all the momentum in the party, but also, as you say, and that Promise to America statement and the paucity of people willing to sign up for it, I think that is a reflection among mainstream Democrats, certainly in office, in members of Congress in particular, members of the Senate, members of the House, about how alarmed they are about this and how nervous they are about getting on the wrong side of the primary electorate here, because the primary electorate is energized by this democratic, socialist, whatever you want to call it, this far left movement. I spoke yesterday to a very prominent, very senior Democrat who is in a race in his state, who is a very mainstream, very, very sort of almost kind of hardcore moderate, if there's such a thing. You can imagine a kind of an extreme moderate. He's made enemies on the left over some of the cultural issues, in particular the transgender issue. But he's very much mindful that on economic issues, the far left is kind of making the argument right now, and the challenge of inequality, the demands that people have of Medicare for all. That's basically a kind of a national health style system, which a lot of Democrats are now arguing for. Anti-Israel, strongly anti-Israel, very critical of Netanyahu, very supportive of the Palestinian cause. More and more mainstream Democrats are being pushed in that direction by the party for fear of losing their seat, or just of losing the end, especially in close races that they might have with Republicans. They need the committed, the activists, the energy of those people to come out and support them. So there's no question, again, the Democratic Party is not becoming a socialist party, but that far left wing of the party is pushing the middle of the party, the mainstream of the party, especially on economic issues. It is pushing mainstream Democrats in a much more left-wing, progressive, kind of, dare I say, sort of British Labour Party kind of direction. It's a fascinating phenomenon, and a lot of Democrats are worried about it, because they think if that does become the message, then what should be very favourable circumstances for this year in the midterm elections could become more difficult, because the Republicans will say, "Hey, you really want to elect a bunch of socialists to take over America?" And I think that's a challenge for them.
Yeah, it's interesting the number of times Donald Trump has now used the word communism in various speeches, trying to use it to latch on to this, to really attack the party as a whole. But also, to your point about Israel, I think we're already seeing signs of, or the flavors of debate, particularly if the Democrats, as currently projected, take back the House. You have Hakeem Jeffries, who's seen as the most likely candidate to be the Speaker of the House if the Democrats take back the House. Obviously, nothing is given. And then you have a bid this week to cut off Israel aid, and lots of Democrats wanting to vote for that. It's been spurred by Thomas Massie, a very independent Republican who lost his own primary when Trump went against him. But Hakeem Jeffries has said that he's not going to join this bid. He was going to oppose it, putting it down to the wording. But yet you have lots of Democrats saying that they want to join this. And particularly when you start to get some of these new candidates in Congress, some of these Democratic Socialists, I think it's going to be bigger than the Squad, if we think back to that period. And perhaps, just as you say, just moving the party lots of different positions. And the only other thing I'd just add is, just again, slightly on the Israel point, I've definitely been picking up in the past couple of weeks, because you have the midterms, but everyone's already talking about 2028. I heard various people say, "Oh, well, I can sleep easy if the 2028 choice is Marco Rubio or Josh Shapiro." Josh Shapiro, of course, was tipped to be Kamala Harris's VP candidate. She chose not to go with him. She went with Tim Walz instead. I think he's seen as speaking more to some of these Rust Belt working class voters. But Josh Shapiro is Jewish. And I had, recently I was speaking at an event, and some of the centrist kind of figures there were saying they don't think this Democrat Party is going to pick a Jewish candidate by the time of the next election. They think that the current dynamics in the party would stop that from happening.
Yeah, just very quickly on the main race, the Graham Platner, the Nazi tattoo / socialist guy. That's going to be very interesting there. And really one to watch. Now they've got to replace him. He's pulled out. They can't have another primary. It's too late for that. So they've got this special nominating convention, which I think, Kate, as I'm right in saying, I think happens next week. I think a week from Saturday. And, that's going to be quite interesting who gets there, because Maine it's a crucial race. It's a real target seat for the Democrats. They've got every prospect of winning that seat, currently held by a Republican. If they can win this race, it will be huge for them. And one of the candidates, I love one of the candidates, Troy Jackson, the Johnny Cash of the Allagash, as they called him, very hard left candidate. He seems to be the favorite right now, and there's a real chance, I think, possibly of pulling that off.
I'm a logger from Allagash. In '98, we were getting squeezed by greedy billionaires trying to replace us. So we blocked the border. When they arrested us, they thought they'd won. But I was just getting started.
So this is a third-generation logger, born when his mother was 16 and backed by the Democratic Socialists. He backed Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton, and his nickname, as you said, relates to the country singer. Which talks more to his working class credentials than I think his vocal talents. But again, it just does speak to the fact that while Graham Platner may be out of the race. I think the politics he represents, which is one of the reasons he's stuck in that race for so long. You had these advisors around him, some of him also worked for Mandani, Morris Katz, for example, this, I think, Upper East Side New Yorker who has almost become a bogeyman for centrist Democrats because they see him as getting behind lots of these candidates. But, he didn't want to step down because they wanted to preserve that wing of the party. And I think as we enter, the countdown really to pick a successor for Platner, there's every indication that the politics of Platner and what made him kind of land as a candidate and get some of the backing have not gone away.